The fluorescent lights of Thornton Industries flickered as Marcus. Chen collapsed against the marble wall of the executive suite. His $3,000 suit crumpled. His face streaked with tears. At 28, he'd never known real fear. Not in boardrooms, not in hostile takeovers. Not even when his father handed him the vice president title before he'd earned it. But now, with his phone clutched in his trembling hand and his mother's cardiologist's words echoing in his mind, 12 hours. Maybe less. Marcus understood that all his money, all his connections, all his privilege meant absolutely nothing. His mother needed a rare blood-type transfusion, AB negative with specific antibodies. The hospitals were empty. The blood banks had nothing. And Chen Mei-ling, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give her son the world, was dying 300 miles away while he stood paralyzed in a building that bore his family's name. That's when he saw him. Robert Washington was 62 years old, though his hands looked 80 from decades of janitorial work. He'd been mopping the same hallway for the past 15 years, arriving at 5 a.m. every morning, leaving at 2 p.m. to catch 2 buses home to his grandkids. Most executives walked past him like he was invisible. Marcus had never once looked him in the eye. But desperation has a way of breaking down walls we didn't even know we'd built. "Please," Marcus heard himself say, his voice cracking as he stumbled toward the older man. "Please, I need help. My mom's dying. I don't know what to do. I've called everyone, I've tried everything, and I just—" His voice dissolved into a sob that surprised them both. Robert set down his mop, his weathered face softening, with the kind of compassion that can't be taught in business schools. "Son, take a breath. Tell me what's happening." Through gasping breaths, Marcus explained everything. The heart condition, the emergency surgery, the blood type they couldn't find, the ticking clock that was stealing his mother away while he stood, helpless in a building full of people who could buy anything except the one thing that mattered. Robert listened without interruption, his calloused hand steady on Marcus's shoulder. When the younger man finally fell silent, exhausted from his own anguish, Robert asked one simple question. "What blood type does she need?" "AB negative with CMV negative antibodies," Marcus whispered. "It's so rare." The doctor said. "I'm AB negative," Robert said quietly. Marcus's head snapped up. "What?" "Donated blood my whole life. Rare type runs in my family. Got tested for everything when my daughter needed surgery 20 years back. I'm CMV negative too." Robert was already pulling his phone from his pocket. "Which hospital?" What happened next would become legend in the halls of Thornton Industries, though the full story would take weeks to unfold. Robert didn't just offer his blood. He called his brother, Jerome, who managed a church community center across town. Within 30 minutes, Jerome had activated a prayer chain that reached 2,000 people. Within an hour, 15 AB-negative donors had been identified across the city. Within 90 minutes, Robert was in Marcus's car, a Mercedes that cost more than Robert had earned in 5 years, racing toward Das Cedar Grove Medical Center. Marcus drove in stunned silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Every few minutes, he glanced at Robert. This man he'd walked past 1,000 times without seeing, and felt something crack open in his chest. "Why?" Marcus finally asked as they merged onto the highway. "You don't know me. You don't know my mother. Why would you drop everything to help us?" Robert gazed out the window at the passing landscape, a slight smile touching his lips. "Your mama raised you, didn't she? Made sure you got educated, gave you opportunities. She worked 3 jobs to put me through school," Marcus said softly. "Cleaned houses, worked nights at a factory, took in laundry. My father left when I was 6. She did it all alone." "Then I know your mama," Robert said simply. "She's every mama who ever broke her back for her baby. Every woman who chose her child's future over her own comfort. That's not a stranger, son. That's family. That's all of us who came up hard and know what sacrifice looks like." They rode in silence for another mile before Robert spoke again. "You know what I see every day in that building? People who forgot where they came from. People who think their titles make them better than the woman who cleans their office or the man who fixes their computers. Your mama didn't raise you to have money, Marcus. She raised you to be human. Today's the day you remember that." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. and he had to pull over to the shoulder because he couldn't see through his tears. This man he'd considered beneath his notice, was giving him something more precious than blood. He was giving him truth. They arrived at Cedar Grove, just as Chen Mei Ling was being prepped for emergency surgery. The doctors rushed. Robert through screening, a process that normally took hours compressed into 45 urgent minutes. Marcus sat in the waiting room, his head in his hands while Robert lay on a donation table giving his blood to save a woman he'd never met. But Robert had done something else too, something Marcus wouldn't discover until later. He'd called his grandson, Deshaun, a college student studying communications, and asked him to document what was happening. Deshaun, armed with his phone and his grandfather's quiet instructions, had posted the story on social media. By the time Chen Mei Ling came out of surgery, stable, recovering, her heart successfully repaired with the blood Robert and 4 other donors provided, Marcus's phone was exploding. The story had gone viral. Millions of people had watched updates of a janitor racing to save his CEO's mother, moved by the simple caption Deshaun had written. "My grandpa says we're all family when someone's hurting." Today he proved it. But the real earthquake was happening at Thornton Industries. Marcus returned to work 3 days later, after staying at his mother's bedside while she regained strength. He expected the office to feel the same. Cold, hierarchical, transactional. Instead, he walked into a revolution. The entire executive team was waiting in the conference room. His father, Richard Thornton, stood at the head of the table, and beside him was Robert Washington, still in his janitor's uniform, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We need to talk about what happened," Richard said, his voice gruff but not unkind. The board saw the story. The shareholders saw it. Hell, the whole world saw it. And they all saw the same thing. A company where the janitor has more humanity than the people running the place. Marcus started to speak, but his father held up his hand. "I'm not finished. Robert, you've worked here 15 years. In 15 years, I never asked you about your life. Never knew you were a deacon at your church. Never knew you organized community blood drives. Never knew you'd put 2 grandkids through college on a janitor's salary. That's on me. That's on all of us." Richard turned to the assembled executives. Effective immediately, we're implementing new policies. Every employee gets health care that actually covers their families. Real health care. We're establishing a hardship fund for emergencies, starting with $1 million allocation. We're creating mentorship programs that cross-departmental lines because apparently we need to remember we're all human beings, not just titles and salaries. He looked back at Robert. "And you, sir, if you're willing, I'd like you to join our board of directors. Not as a token, not as publicity, though God knows we could use some better publicity. But because you understand something we forgot. You understand people." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded on the conference table. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I'll do it on one condition. This can't be about one feel-good story. You want to change this company? Then everyone in this room starts learning everyone's name. The people who clean your offices, who cook in your cafeteria, who keep this building running, they all have names. They all have stories, they all matter. You do that, and I'll help any way I can." The room erupted in agreement, and Marcus watched something he'd never seen in 15 years of board meetings. Executives pulling out their phones to capture Robert's words. 6 months later, Thornton Industries looked fundamentally different. The executive floors had been redesigned with common areas where janitors, mail clerks, and VPs ate lunch together. The company had launched a foundation focused on blood donation awareness, raising enough to fund mobile donation clinics across 12 states. Employee satisfaction had tripled. Profits had actually increased, fueled by reduced turnover and a workforce that finally felt valued. But for Marcus, the real change was personal. Every morning he arrived at 5:30 a.m., not to work, but to have coffee with Robert before the building filled up. They talked about everything: family, faith, the weight of privilege, the dignity of labor. Robert became the mentor Marcus never knew he needed, teaching him that true leadership means seeing people, all people, as fully human. Chen Mei Ling recovered completely, and on her first visit to Thornton Industries after her surgery, she asked to meet Robert. Marcus watched his mother, this tiny, fierce woman who'd given him everything, embrace the man who'd saved her life. "You gave my son something even more important than you gave me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave him back his heart." Robert just smiled. "I think he always had it, ma'am. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us where we put it." The story could have ended there. A neat tale of redemption and corporate transformation. But life is messier and more beautiful than clean endings. A year after that desperate drive to Cedar Grove, Marcus stepped down as vice president. The decision shocked everyone, but he'd found his calling elsewhere. Using his business expertise and Robert's community connections, he launched a nonprofit connecting corporations with employees in crisis, creating rapid response networks for medical emergencies, housing issues, and family disasters. "I spent years thinking success meant corner offices and quarterly earnings," Marcus told a reporter who covered the nonprofit's first anniversary. "Robert taught me that success is measuring how many people you help when they're falling. Everything else is just noise." Robert still worked at Thornton Industries, though his role had evolved. He split his time between facilities management and what the company now called culture development, making sure that the changes they'd implemented weren't just corporate theater but genuine transformation. And every day, without fail, he still mopped that same hallway where he'd first seen a desperate young man crumble against a marble wall. "Keeps me humble," Robert explained when people asked why he didn't give up the janitorial work. "Keeps me connected to where I came from and why this all matters." On the first anniversary of Chen Mei-ling's surgery, Marcus organized a blood drive at Thornton Industries. 300 employees participated, including Richard Thornton himself, who publicly admitted he'd never donated blood before. "My son's janitor taught me more about being a CEO than 40 years in business," Richard said at the event, Robert standing beside him. "He taught me that the measure of a company isn't its stock price. It's whether the person mopping your floors knows you'd drop everything to help them, just like they dropped everything to help you." The story of Marcus and Robert spread far beyond Thornton Industries, inspiring similar programs at corporations across the country. But for the two men at its center, the real reward was simpler, a friendship forged in crisis, sustained by mutual respect, and rooted in the revolutionary idea that every person you meet carries infinite worth. Sometimes Marcus still thought about that desperate moment when he'd begged a janitor for help, not knowing that the man with the mop held the keys to everything he'd been searching for. Not just blood for his mother's veins, but a transfusion of humanity for his own withered soul. Robert had given him both, asking nothing in return except that Marcus remember, we're all family when someone's hurting, and we're all someone's precious child worthy of being seen.